Thank you all for joining us in person and online. Today we're going to talk about the ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript, app development with components, and this is part one in a 4-part series. We're going to start with talking about programming patterns, but before we begin, I just wanted to ask a quick question. If you're all familiar with the Maps SDK, have you been doing development with plain JavaScript? Just a raise of hands, plain JavaScript, HTML. And then raise of hands as well if you've been developing with a framework like React, Angular, Vue. Good number of hands. Thank you for that. We're going to start with plain JavaScript, HTML, talking about getting started with the basics and then building up from there. And for that, I'm going to pass it off to Julie and Yann to introduce themselves.
Wait, but who are you?
Oh, I'm Omar, and I'm a product engineer on the Maps SDK, mainly for web components, and I work alongside Julie and Yann.
I'm Julie Powell, and I'm in product management, and I work on the SDK with these guys and Calcite and our other web development technology.
And I'm Yann Cabon, and I work as a software engineer on the Maps SDK in core and also components.
Thanks.
All right, let's get started.
Yeah, I'll be on the Pigeonhole moderating for anybody who has questions online. And then for the rest of the session, Yann and Julie will be taking over.
Okay. We do put this up front because we do really, really value your feedback. So after the session, if you want to share with us what you felt about the session, if you liked it, if you had ideas for next year, I really pay attention to everything you write. So please fill out the surveys. So we're focusing on both components and the core JavaScript API today, more heavily on components. And I like to show this slide because really components is one aspect of how the SDK kind of follows the evolution of the browser. As more standards are introduced that are adopted widely in the browser, we're able to take advantage of it and optimize the SDK, whether it's reducing our code and just taking some advantage of something available in the browser, or adopting a standard like web component standards, and so that we can build functionality in a better way for you guys all to use in your applications. So what is components? I always show this slide because it's pretty incredible. This whole shadow analysis application, the ability to do that and then change the base map. This is the only code that you would have to write with the SDK to do that. And previously, if you were using the old legacy approach using widgets and the view, this is what the code would look like for the same application. So just putting it into context. So why are we so excited about components? Well, it's a really great way for us to encapsulate functionality, providing it in a standard way. If you know how to add a HTML button to your application, you can add a map or an elevation profile to your application. It's a declarative first programming approach, so you can get a lot accomplished just in your HTML. And then you can also build in JavaScript too, but you have that ability to really get really far with just the declarative first approach. Full framework support, so these components are framework agnostic, so you can develop any way you'd like, and components don't have an opinion on that, either do we. We really want to support your development in the way you want to do development. And this isn't just for you guys, this is for Esri. We're doing all our internal development using web components. So if you've been watching MapView or SceneViewer, the different apps over time, if you're keeping a close look at it, you're starting to see more and more experiences shared across our apps. And that's thanks to us building web components, sharing them across apps, so you have those shared experiences. And as we do that, we're actually starting to release some of those shared experiences as part of the SDK. Charts was an example of that. The arcade editor is an example of that. We're going to continue to follow that pattern. So you can build less code, bring in more ArcGIS experiences with just a few lines of code. What is the JavaScript SDK? We get so excited about components, and we're talking about components all the time, and then I get customers saying, wait, do you still have that core JavaScript library? Is it only components? Well, yes, we have the components and we have the core JavaScript API, which is the underlying business logic. You have full access to that still. And we're working very hard on the core API. And of course, you have the documentation. You have the references, resources, quite a bit to help you build your applications. And it's always evolving. This is just a look at the different component packages we have today. This slide is invalid every conference, it seems like, because we're constantly adding and bringing in more components that you can use in your application. Today we'll be primarily focused on the map components, but you also have charts, the coding components, the AI assistant, which is exciting for a lot of people. There's sessions focused on that. You have the embeddable components, and then there's the newest one. Well, common components and the AI are the newest ones. For map components, that's really consisting of the map, the scene, the functionality equivalent to what the widgets have. And also, as we introduce new functionality, it's always delivered as components, not widgets. Okay, so this session is very demo heavy. I'm going to walk you through a demo with multiple steps. I'm going to be doing a bunch of coding in front of you, so if you see something that I missed, call it out, so you don't have to watch me debug on stage, okay? That'll be great. So each step, I'm going to kind of do a quick overview of what we're looking at, and then we'll go into the code. And this session is really geared towards a wide range of developers. Some of you guys will be experienced, some of you are just beginning, so I'm starting from the very beginning, and then we'll continue to build on top of that. So the very first thing I wanted to mention is, if anybody has started updating their apps from anything before 5.0, this is my very favorite part of updating apps. I get to delete most of that code, all that code on the left-hand side. So all of these different script tags to bring in the different component packages, whether it's, in this case, I'm loading charts and the map components. I'm loading style sheets. I'm loading Calcite. On the right-hand side, it's just one script tag, and it brings in what you need. So it's really fun to delete code. You could just replace it with a single script tag.
Yeah, and also feedback that we got last year is like people were confused with, like which version of Calcite goes with which version of the SDK. And so for 5, everybody has the same version. So, and we will continue this way. So like that, there is no, no confusion. Yeah.
Okay, so the very beginning, let's look at the different, let's look at the anatomy of one of these applications. So on the right-hand side, we have a map and a legend. And so notice here we have the map as the parent component. We've got the zoom, the legend. And I wanted to point out that we have 2 script tags. The best practice is to have that closing script tag for legend. We have the attributes. So components work with attributes when you're using them in HTML. If you look at the bottom doc, you can see what that same attribute looks like as a property. You have the dash for attribute, and then you have camel case for property. So you kind of need to know which one you're using, if you're using an HTML or JavaScript. And then, of course, you have the valid types, or the type and the valid values documented. Then you also have the slots. So that's where do you want that component. Slots are a great way for us to enable you to integrate your own custom workflows. It's essentially placeholders, predefined placeholders that we've thought, hey, these guys will probably want to integrate functionality here, here, here. So we've predefined these slots, and you can decide where you want your components. In this case, the legend is at the bottom right of the map. But you don't always want to put components, on top of the map. So in this case, this one's at the top left slot. But notice the feature table on the right-hand side. That is not a child of the map. In that case, it's no problem. You can put it anywhere you want, but you do need to set the reference element of that component so it knows how to interact with the map. It needs that to be able to communicate with it and use aspects of the map. That's all about positioning. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we go into the demo is this application that we're building is highly driven by a web map that I created. You don't have to start with a web map. You can start just with services, but this actually saves you a lot of time because you can use an authoring environment to create all these things, reduce code, and then, hey, later this year, if you change your mind about something, you just go change the web map and it's reflected in your code. You're not redeploying an application. So in this app that we're going to be building, all the purple is what I'm actually getting from the web map and just loading in my application. So let's get started. First, let's start in Map Viewer, and I just want to show you like a quick tour of what I'm getting from the web map. I've got the pop-up there, of course. I also have the table here. Sorry, not this one. It's on the trails. I want to do the service trails. Now, this table configuration is saved to the web map. So say I want to change the order of fields, or I don't want to show all fields, which is often the case. You have a million fields and you don't want your end user to have to sort through all of that. You can say which fields you want. I don't need to show the object ID, so I haven't included that. And then this gets saved as part of the web map. Also, when it comes to fields, this is new from last year, is now you can actually configure fields in the web map. And what I mean by that is I can say here, like, notice unit name. Can you see that underline? That's the original name of that field was unit_name, but I can rename it, and then everywhere where that field is displayed, that alias, you'll see the pretty one that I defined, and then it just comes through the web map. The other thing you can do is like shape length. I'm going to go ahead and change that so it looks nicer. I also can define how many decimal places I want, and I also can decide how I want that number to be displayed. So for example, we have international people visiting Zion National Park. Some people have their browser set to like a European locale. If I set to use locale preference, then say if Yann has a French locale, he'll see the comma for the thousand separator as opposed to the decimal point. So if I save that and then make that, save my web map, then, I'm not signed in, then that will actually come through all of my applications, and it will be respected everywhere. The pop-up, feature table, editing, it's saved one place and seen everywhere. The other thing to point out is, let's see here. Oh yeah. So one awesome thing that I think is often overlooked is, the search component is one of our most popular components. So that's, you want to search for a location and view a result. Well, sometimes you have layers in your application that you want to search in addition to like a world geocoder. And that's handy because then your layer results can show up first, and they don't have to like look through a million words that are similar to your layer's words. So you can go to the item details for your web map, and then let's see here, let's let it load for a while. And yay, I think we got it. Okay, so actually, no, I better sign in because I'm going to need to do that. So in the layer properties, I'm going to set up a search source. So the settings for my web map, I go all the way down, and here, application settings, the search. Notice here that I've turned on by layer, so National Park Trails is going to be the first result if I search for something. So that's going to be really useful for my end users. Okay, so that's all the stuff that's coming in the web map. So to get started, this is the item ID that's going to load my web map. But I want to show you how to kind of like figure out, get oriented within the SDK site. So our tutorials have been updated to use the components. You have this components page that's kind of outlining the different component packages. Programming patterns is a great place to spend some time and get familiar. But a fun place to go is the references. So here you have the core JavaScript API, and then you have all the different component packages we have. If I go inside of map components, I'm going to go look at the map first. Down here. And Omar has actually done a lot of work so that we could have an embedded demo inside this doc. So in addition to all of the reference of how to use the component, I can actually play around with it and see it working in my application, in this demo. So I'll just replace that with the item ID of my web map, and here we have the Zion National Park. And of course I have the pop-up and everything that's part of the web app. So another component that I'm going to be using in my application is the pop-up component. That's one of the newer components. It's still in beta, so you can choose between using the old legacy widget that's baked into the map, or use this new pop-up component. And I'm going to be using this because I like configuring it on here and then using it in my app. So one of the things I want to do, well, actually, let's oh gosh, let's go down a little bit to see it better. Okay, so I'm going to open a pop-up so we can watch it change. All right, there we go. So many customers have come to me in the past. Well, first of all, we want to be able to dock it. But customers have come, and some people just want a very simple pop-up. You may not want all the UI that you see in the pop-up, and you have full control over that. So I'm going to hide the collapse button. I'm going to, let's see, hide feature navigation. What else do I want to hide? The action bar, I'm going to hide. I think with that, so you can see the pop-up starting to simplify over here. After I start setting these things, you can go to the code and then copy that and put it in your application. So I'm going to copy the pop-up and go to this is what our app looks like right now. It just has a map. So I'm going to go here and add the pop-up. But I also want some other things in my application. I want to zoom. So we've updated we're going to find out if I can type and talk at the same time. We've added, now you can actually decide whether you want the zoom by adding a component or not adding it. So I'm going to give it the top left slot for zoom. I'm also going to have a legend, but I don't want it always to be displaying. ArcGIS expand. And so I'm going to put that legend is going to be in the bottom left. Oopsie. Bottom left. And then inside, we're going to have an ArcGIS legend. And then on the right-hand side, I'm going to put a search component. So ArcGIS Search. And that's going to go in the top right. Okay. With that, let's see what we get here. So here's our search. Remember how I was saying it's handy to have those search sources? If I search for like the Angel's Landing Trail, look, that first result is that. That's so handy. So I always recommend that you check that out if there's a layer that makes sense to search. We got our simplified pop-up that I wanted, and then I have the legend. Okay, and we have the zoom here. All right, so let's go back to slides and actually, do I want to do one more thing? No, that's what we're doing right now. All right, so we're going to do our next step. I want to introduce Calcite Design System. Can you raise your hand if you are using Calcite already? Wow, a lot of people using Calcite. Calcite is Esri's design system. It's a great way to avoid having to write a ton of CSS, which is my favorite. Also, the components are all built with Calcite, so if you create your own component or your own experience and it's using Calcite, it all matches really well. You can theme it all together with the components. There's a lot of benefits to using Calcite. But Calcite isn't just components. It's also icons. This is one of the largest icon library available in any design system in the world, actually. You can brand it, make it your own. It comes with a Figma UI kit, so you can have that designer-developer partnership. And there's design guidelines giving you recommendations of how to use a component and how not to use a component. So in the next step, we're going to use Calcite. So let's have a quick look at Calcite. Here's the homepage. You have a lot of tutorials, or a handful of tutorials that you can use to get started. The team's working very hard to add more and more examples and places, get starter applications for you to use. And they have the Components tab, where you can go in and configure a component similar to what I was showing with Omar's work in the SDK. So here I have the button. I can go in and say I want an outline appearance, change however I want it. And then once I like it the way I have configured it, I can look at the code and then copy that in my application. Were you going to say something?
Something that came up.
Can he have his mic? Oh, there we
Okay.
go.
Something that came up online was a question about whether you can create your own very custom component to the degree of what widgets used to allow, and then how do you expand beyond like the prepackaged components that Julie talked about earlier, the map components, chart components, and so on. So since we've already covered like the core API and Calcite, I thought it'd be important to mention that if you'd like to develop custom components, whether they be React, Lit, or Angular components, you can take advantage of the core API and its view models directly. And then Calcite components are also a great option when you're doing those custom components, because then you can have a similar look and feel to the SDK's components, but also for accessibility, responsive design, and your own customization, which is pretty nice.
Thanks, Omar. Okay, so let's get going, continuing with the application. So what I've created is a Calcite shell with a couple placeholders of where I'm going to put things. This is what the application looks like now, and I'm going to go ahead and update it with the map. And Calcite Shell is basically one of the main components that's managing layout. So I'm going to copy this ArcGIS map that I just worked on. And here's the Calcite Shell that's organizing the layout. I have the navigation component, which is the header. And then I have a panel, one of the panels where I'm going to put the map. So I'm just going to put that in, and then let's look at that. And we'll see now the map is taking over the default slot in this Calcite layout. Now, some people prefer the search here. I tend to like to put it outside of the map just to have more space. So I'm going to go ahead and move the search component, take it out of the map, and put it inside the navigation. Now, the slot needs to be updated to Calcite slot content, and is the end of the navigation. And does everyone remember what you need to do when it's outside of the map? Yeah, you need to set the reference element. So reference element equals map. Better make sure I gave an ID. Okay, so we should be good. So now I'll refresh, and I have it up here. Let's test it out and search for Angel's Landing, and we're in business. Okay. So the other thing I want to do is I want to add an elevation profile. Now, when I first started using elevation profile, I thought you could only use that in 3D, but actually it works perfectly in 2D as well. So let's add an elevation profile. Let's see here, that's in my next step down here. And I'm going to uncomment this code. So it's below the map, so it's using the reference element. It has a few properties set, like which units I want to use. But I'm not quite done. I actually have to give the map the terrain information to be able to use that. So I'm going to set ground elevation to world elevation, and that's just going to use. Oopsie.
It's ground.
Oh, that's right, ground. That's right, ground. Thank you, Yann. To world elevation. Okay. So that's going to use the world elevation service. You can use your own elevation service, by the way, if you have like a more higher precision one for an area you're working in. But let's go ahead and see how that works. Let's see if do I have it in? Oh, I'm not looking at the right. That's this one, sorry. Let's refresh that. Here I have the elevation profile, and I'll just go ahead and select a line, and here we have the elevation. All right, so we are done with the Calcite step. Let's go back to slides. Okay, so now everything, if you've noticed, everything I've done so far is in HTML. I haven't touched any JavaScript. Now we're going to do a little bit of JavaScript to add a little bit more application logic. So the way you add your JavaScript in your application, Yann's going to talk about this some more later, is to bring in a script tag and reference your JavaScript file. Then in JavaScript, you're going to want to work with your components, and that should look pretty familiar. If you've worked, as I said, worked with a button before and you want to do something within JavaScript, you basically get it from the DOM, either by the type or by the ID, and then you can start doing things with it. And that's what we're going to do. So we use when you're working with components, really you're using events to tap in parts of the workflow, to listen for user interaction or a particular component state. It's really event driven to be working with components. All of the components have their events documented. This is the events for the map component. Also working with the view. I'm sure you guys have worked with the view before. There's an event called ArcGIS View Ready Change. You can listen for that event, or you could decide to use an await view on ready, listen for that property to, for that to be ready. So what's ready when that actually fires? Well, the map instance was created. If it has a web app or web scene, that's been loaded, so you can actually figure out what layers are in there. It has a spatial reference, center, and scale, and then the children of the component should also be ready. So that's where you can start interacting with the view. This doesn't mean that all your data is downloaded and ready to be working with. This means the view is set up and for you to start interacting with the view object itself. Another important aspect to be aware of is this only fires once. So it's worth mentioning, because this has happened to me a number of times, where I have an event handler for when the view's ready, but my code is never executed. And that's because actually the view is already ready before it gets to my event handler, and so my event handler never fires. So you can check the property to see element.ready to see if it's ready. The ArcGIS view change watches properties on the view. For example, if you're zooming or panning, something's changing with the view, you can use that to have interaction with your own logic in your application. And that's what we'll do now. So in this step, I'm going to add the feature table. Let's see, where is that? Okay, so let's go to that step. And I'm going to add, if you remember in this application, this is where I have a little placeholder for my table. So I'm going to add an ArcGIS feature table. And why is that? Oh, it did it for me. Okay, so ArcGIS feature table. It needs a reference element. And let's see, did I want to add something else? Oh yeah, so the other thing is the feature table has the ability to work with attachments. So I've got this hiking trails app, and I have some attachments, like pictures I want to show for the trails. So to enable attachments, I'm going to just say attachments enabled. With Boolean attributes, just by adding that, it sets it to true, and then it will work in my application. So now I've added the feature table, but that's not quite enough for it to work just yet. I can actually give it a layer portal item ID, but that's not going to wire it up to my web app the way I want. I want to pull the layer from the web app and give it to the feature table, and that's why I'm bringing in JavaScript. Down here I am loading my JavaScript. So let's have a look at that. In my JavaScript, I'm getting the map element, I'm getting the table element. I took the opportunity to get the pop-up, and I'm going to actually go ahead and dock it when you load the application to the right to kind of keep it out of the way. Notice here I've got the map element view on ready. I have to do that because I'm pulling out one of the layers of the view. If I didn't do that, it would execute this code before the view was ready, and then I would never get the layer I'm looking for. So I got the trails layer out of the web map, and I tell the table, okay, this is your layer you're working with. I've set it to only work with one selection at a time. And here's that ArcGIS View Ready Change event. That's going to fire anytime I move the extent of the map. And I'm going to update the table's geometry. It's basically doing a spatial filter. So only show me the trails that are in the current view. Okay, so with that, let's go to that next step and see if that works for us. Loading, and then if I zoom in far, we should see it update, and it did do that. Now it's just 31 trails. Okay, that is what we wanted to do with table. The next thing I wanted to talk about in the demo is Selection Manager. I love Selection Manager because it really can simplify the logic in your code. And I made this little diagram to kind of show how it works. So that pink guy is a user. maybe he or she selects some features, and then the view has this concept of the selection manager. So it knows what this user has selected in some way or another, which we'll talk about in a minute. Then the selection change event fires, and these are all objects in the SDK that already know how to work with selection. And I think we're going to continue to build that out with more components. The map has the selection set. It's part of the selection manager. Table will listen to selection. Chart will listen to selection. Editor, in fact, there was an editing session earlier today. If you might have gone to it, they talked about selection manager. And you can have your own component listen to selection. So if you want to know what was selected and do something with that selection, then you can do that. Also, your component can contribute to the selected features. So if you have a workflow where you want to select some features and then have these other components pay attention to that, you can do that. So that's what we're going to do right now. So let's go to selection. Let's go to the JavaScript. Okay, here's how we're doing selection. Now, I should probably tell you my goal first. Let me demo selection. So when I select a trail, I want that to automatically show in the elevation profile. I want it to be selected in the table as well. It's not. See, it says selected 0, so something's up right there. I also want, when I search for something like Angel's Landing, from the search result, I want that also to be respected in the table and the elevation profile and the map. So everything is wired together, including the pop-up. Everybody's listening to selection. So we have one little issue to fix because table didn't pay attention to when I selected a trail, but part of it's working. So let's see what's happening here. So when the search element has a search result, so I've searched for something and I actually got a result, I'm using the view.selection manager and I'm replacing the selection. So I just want that one trail to be selected. Same thing, if you click on the map, I'm doing a hit test. If I get a result, then I'm saying view selection manager, replace it, and then I'm using that as the selection. Then when the selection changes, I'm listening for the view selection manager change event, and that's where I'm getting the feature for the elevation profile. So all of this is kind of wired together by using this event. Now the reason why table was not listening for that is because there's one property you have to add to table for it to pay attention to the view selection. And that is sync view selection. That's another Boolean, so that's all I need to write. And then if I refresh and let's select a trail, now I have one selected. Let's just verify. And now I have that one trail selected. So everything is wired up now. So this demo was originally written without Selection Manager, and using Selection Manager reduced my code greatly by being able to do this. All right, now I just have one more step before all of Yann's magic, and that is styling. So I am just barely going to touch on styling. Our part 3 of this series is going to dig deep into all the styling capabilities and really inspire you with all the different styling you can do. But as I mentioned, Calcite and the SDK allows you to style your application, really make it your own, match your brand, match the way your fonts look. And so let me show you what that looks like or how you get started. So back to that same button, I set it to that outline, but let's set it back to solid to see it better. You can actually play around with some of these components and see how the branding's affected. So if you go to this little cogwheel down here, that's where I can set some branding. And let's make it a pink button. And here now I have that pink button. I can set hover state. There's many styles you can set. And right down here is documenting the Calcite components, which styles you can set. In the code, you can see the CSS that you need to set the brand. Now the JavaScript components also have, some of them have their own variables that you can set to style. But what I wanted to point out really quick for you is if you go to Foundations and Design Tokens, this has the reference of all the different variables you can set to start styling your UI. And as I mentioned, we're using Calcite. If you use Calcite for your application, and they're used within components by setting these variables, it applies automatically to your components unless you override it. So what I'm going to do is something very simple in my app to style it. The first thing I have, let's just look at the CSS. So I have a forest theme defined, and I have a burn, where's my burned orange? I have a burned orange theme defined with all these different Calcite variables. In my code, I've just set the class on the body to this burnt orange theme. Let's have a look at what that gives us. So we have that nice color up here. I'll select a trail. You see that I didn't actually customize this, but I customized the button. I have the color applied here. If I do Angel's Landing again, it's just because I don't know all the trails in Zion. Sorry, I always go to Angel's Landing. But it's respected in the search. So all this is applied. I can also change that to the forest theme, and I'll do that really quick. And go back, and then refresh. And now I get the green look instead. So it's actually pretty simple to start styling your application. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I also styled the highlight. I made this orange color. You don't have to stop at CSS when you're styling your app. You can think about base map, your layers, your highlight colors, really make it all blend together. You could go way beyond just the simple CSS. Okay, so with that, let's go to my amazing colleague, Yann.
Thanks, Julie. So Julie went over like pretty much everything you have to know to work with the components, and we want to be able to build applications all in declarative as much as possible. So put as much as possible in the UI, in the HTML. But then at some point you need to write some JavaScript. So Julie showed like a JavaScript file where she wires up some events and then to wire up the different components together. What we want then to do sometimes is to work with the core API, right? So, for example, if you want to watch for some properties on some of the components, you need to use reactive utils. Or if you want to use layers, you need to import them to add them to your map. So for that, we have released a utility called $ArcGIS import, and it's available as soon as you put your script tag to the SDK. And then it offers, it's a promise-based API, and then you can import any modules of the core SDK or any modules of the components that will be utilities through this syntax. And then if you put that in your module that Julie created, for example, with the script tag with the type module, then you have access to the top level await, so you can await when import is done, and then just use reactive utils. Import takes either one module name or an array of module names, so you can import multiple files in parallel. So how to get started, like to know more about $ArcGIS import, you can go into the getting started in the SDK, and then you have a section called add core API modules that goes into some details. And then here you have an example where the graphic class is imported, and then we get the view element, and then add the graphics, a new graphic to the view graphics. Okay, so now let's take a look at the application from Julie. And then what we want to do is that when we select a trail, I would like to add like some custom UI to give me the length of the trail and also the elevation gain. And so from that, we're gonna go to Visual Studio Code. And then, so this is the application that Julie wrote already. And then now if I want to import the module, I'm gonna use some, not some emojis. I forgot. Okay, so elevation, all right.
Can you increase your font?
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna increase the font. Okay, so this, and then I'm gonna import. So this is the this code will watch on the analysis profile. There is the analysis view, an elevation profile. Sorry, an elevation profile can have multiple profiles, multiple like if you are measuring the ground elevation and then some elevations on the meshes and so on. So there is a view, and then you can get access to statistics about the actual profile. So here we are using reactive utils, and then to import it, I'm gonna use our $ArcGIS import. ArcGIS. So you may be confused by why there is twice core. It's because it's a bit unfortunate, but we call the SDK when we release the JavaScript API as an NPM package. We decided to call it ArcGIS Core, but then ArcGIS Core has a core package, and should we move it? We didn't want to move everything, so yeah, something to get used to it. And so now, okay. So the other thing I want to do is to add my Calcite chip. So I'm going to use a Calcite chip group that will be displayed here. You can see, so it's 2 chips with 2 icons. And then when I select a trail, then it displays the trail length, not in imperial units, but in metric. Okay, so if you have been using the SDK for a long time, you may be wondering why are we using $ArcGIS import and why are we not using require. So $ArcGIS import is just a wrapper around require at the moment. So under the hood, it will use require and AMD. In JavaScript, there is what we call ES modules, JavaScript modules. This is what Julie created. And these modules, they help splitting your app into multiple files. And they are now supported in all browsers. It wasn't the case 10 years ago, so that's why we were using AMD at the time, because we needed a module system. But then, as time goes, AMD tooling is fading away. People are not, really familiar with AMD modules. They are more familiar with ES modules. So we think that it is going to disappear and at some point. And so. And then, like just the last week, TypeScript 6.0, the release candidate just announced that they are deprecating AMD support. And so we have been anticipating that for a year. And so we introduced $ArcGIS import to create a utility that we guaranteed will work, right? And so Manoja created wrote this blog post about simplifying. Actually, I have, yeah. About how to migrate using the $ArcGIS import, and so she goes into detail about this, and I will show you more in a second. Okay, so let's see how if you have applications, and I met some people yesterday that have applications written in JavaScript and using AMD and require and define syntax. So let's take a look how you can migrate your app. Okay, so this is the code that that I just wrote about using reactive utils. Now let's take a look how it would look if it was in AMD. So in AMD, we're gonna do elevation profile. So this is how you would write something like this in AMD. You would call require. Your require would have a configuration. Either you are using the Dojo config or this way, where you define your package, where your modules are. And then, so in this case, I'm defining a package called app, and then it's going to be located in my AMD folder. And then when require starts, then it will import a set of dependencies. So here I will have an elevation analysis utils, and the function will be called when this module is going to be downloaded, and then we call the elevation analysis util. So now let's create our elevation analysis utils. JS, and then elevation profile, choose AMD, See snippets, I go faster than AI. Okay, elevation. Stopwatch. Okay, so this is, let's go step by step. So this is how an AMD module looks like. You have a defined function, which is called when the module is evaluated, and then you create your set of functions or classes or whatnot, and then you export them using a return, when you return an object with everything you want to export. So in this case, we have our elevation stat, our function to watch for. The elevation stat watch. Okay, to use reactive utils. So this is how we would import it. Esri /core/reactive util. Okay. All right. So this is how it would look like. So if you want to migrate this module to ESM. Let's do another one. Okay, so to migrate it to ESM, you would have to remove this. And then in your module here, you would have to import then reactive utils, import at ArcGIS core. So $ArcGIS import supports both the old file names, Esri/core, but also the new module file name. Reactive utils, and then, okay, wait, also reactive utils, okay. Okay, so now, and then instead of returning the function, we can remove this. Now we can just use export. Okay, so now we have created, an ESM module from an AMD module. In our main file, instead of importing using require, now we can directly get our module using the import syntax. Await, import, which is the native JavaScript, and then we're gonna say ESM / elevation. Will it find it? Yes. And then we're gonna call that with map element elevation profile. So you can see that VS Code also better understands ES modules and gives me, even if it's not TypeScript, it gives me some I don't have it. Yes, some intelligence. All right. Oh. Okay. Let's go over. Yeah, so this is what I just showed. It's like how it would look like. And then you have to, instead of importing the API modules using in the define call, you use $ArcGIS import. Once you have done that, and you can convert all your modules, all your AMD modules into ESM. It's quite a lot of work if you have a large app. And then export your functions directly. So touch base on this. So the require and define syntax, the AMD syntax, is deprecated with the JavaScript SDK at 5.0. We don't know if it's going to be removed at 6.0. We just want to be upfront about this migration that will happen. We are still looking for a replacement because today the tools we use to build the AMD modules produces a better build than other tools like Rollup. So just anticipate your migration so that you are not caught up into, if you want to migrate to 6, if it's happening in 6 or in 7 next year or in 2 years, just anticipate that so that you have a smooth transition. Okay, the last part I want to touch on is some code organization. So Julie showed you some patterns to import the map. We're gonna go over over this. So if you go in the SDK, and then in the programming pattern, in the introduction, there is a section that I want to highlight because this has been a lot of discussion among the SDK people to define how we are supposed to use the ArcGIS map, because there is many combinations of attributes or properties or patterns that we can use. So we found like 3 patterns that are interesting. There is one is to use the item ID, like Julie showed, where you import your map using the ID. There is another one using the map, and there is another one using the web scene. So I'm going to show that quickly. So here we have the first one, which is, okay, I define my map, my base map, my center, and my zoom as attributes, right? And this works great. I can directly use my map. Now, the other pattern that we promote heavily is to first create the web map, and then you just have to copy paste your item ID, and you get the map with all the layers, all the configuration that Julie showed. And then there is another one, which is, okay, I have a map, and I start like this, right? So I define my map with my topo base map, and then my zoom and my center. But then after I want to add a layer. So now I import my layer class, and I want to create a layer from a layer item ID, and then I add it to my map. This pattern, is valid, but then I think like when we build sample for us, it's not very clear because the map is defined really in 2 places, in the markup and then in the module. Here for this example, this is all in a single file, but then if you have it into multiple files, it's really can be confusing, right? So the way I think the better way to do this is to actually import, is to remove this, right? To remove the base map. You can leave eventually the zoom and center, but you can also do it in JavaScript. And then create your map directly in JavaScript. So we're gonna, actually we are already importing the map. So we are importing also web map. And then, like I said, import supports a single module syntax or an array of module syntax. So we're going to import web map. And then instead, okay, so now we have our view element. If I don't set a map on the ArcGIS map, the view element will never become ready. So I need, before doing a view on ready or listen for the ArcGIS view ready change, I need to set up my map. So we are going to create the map here directly, const map equals new web map. And then this is where we are going to define our base map. Topo. And then eventually I can also load my layer first, and then do layers. And then once we have our map, it's all defined in one place, we can say view element. That's not going to work. View element dot map equals map. So I think that's a nicer pattern because you can load the configuration, instantiate your web map, configure your web map, then assign it to the view element. So and try to avoid mixing up both. So if we want to go all the way, I mean, this is the way I would write it. I would just say zoom equals 4 and view element center equals, okay, minus. Now, yes. Yeah, so same thing, of course, but it's just like a better separation. Okay, so these are what I just went through. So we covered just a fraction of the components, and then as years will pass, it will be even more complicated because there will be more and more components. So currently in 5.0 we added more components, but so now you have access to many new packages. You have, charts has been there for a few releases already. We have chart components. You can configure the charts in Map Viewer and then reference them in code, like Julie did for the search and so on. You can also do that for charts, configure them in MapViewer and consume them in the application. We have the AI component beta. This is the AI components. So there is one main ArcGIS assistant component and then a suite of three out-of-the-box agents components that you can configure your assistant with. And then up, we have the common components. This is also a new one, this release. We will put into this package components that will be shared to create other experiences, so other components. So for example, this release, we release the slider, histogram, and ticks. The goal after is to release the ArcGIS histogram slider and other ones. The time slider will use this one and so on. And we have also the embeddable components. This one is a ready-to-go map configured with a bookmark and legend. Just as one component, it's great because you just pass the item ID and then you can, with a few properties to configure, and you can embed that into your web page without any code. We have the coding components also with the arcade editor. So this is used by Esri applications to edit arcade expressions. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, and I also wanted to mention, we are doing a usability study this week. If you want to meet with some of the team and share your experience and answer some questions that'll really help us. So wanted to invite all of you. There's no prep or anything needed, so sign up if you're available. I also wanted to mention that, as I said in the beginning, or maybe Omar said it, this is a 1 of 4-part series. So the next one is, as you guys saw, we just did vanilla JavaScript and working with the CDN, Yann and I. But the next one is all about working with frameworks, like understanding what frameworks do for you and how to use them with components. The second one is user experience. So that's going to be a great session all about styling and building out a great experience, responsive design, all of that. And then the final one, actually, Omar, do you want to say a few words about the final one?
It's just extending and styling. I think that's going to be led by Kitty and Renee. So they're going to talk about theming and stuff like that.
Although I think maybe I think I messed up one of these. Don't you have a collection of web apps? Do you want to mention that one?
So there's an unofficial part 5 that we're going to talk about, things like Astro, monorepos, package managers. So kind of scaling your repository and hosting multiple packages and applications so that you can avoid things like technical debt, large build sizes, and so on. So that's going to be led by myself and Kelly Hutchins from Instant Apps. So we're going to talk about how Instant Apps are built, if you're curious.
When is that one again?
That's Thursday, tomorrow.
Thursday.
Title, I'll look that up. And in the meantime, another session I want to plug is the ArcGIS Experience Builder Advanced Customization. We had a lot of questions in Pigeonhole about, can we use the Maps SDK in the Experience Builder? Can we use Calcite? They do have documentation under sample code on how to do that. But if you want to attend that particular session tomorrow in Primrose B, that'll be a really helpful session. And then I'll look up the title of the other session.
His session is ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript, build and maintain a collection of web apps. Maybe we could take a question from the audience if there's one. Right here? Or Omar's gonna run. Don't run down the stairs though.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I have 2 questions. So I'm going to do both of them. Is that selection manager concept coming to .NET? Do you know?
This is a whole separate SDK.
Yeah.
The teams do work independently. I don't.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Okay.
We don't know.
And is there any plan to deprecate the webpack plugin, the ArcGIS webpack plugin, in favor of Vite or something?
I wouldn't. I don't. The webpack plugin made sense when we didn't have ArcGIS Core, but now it's like you should be able to use the SDK without any plugin at all, and just yeah. So yeah, we can deprecate it, but it's like I think it's obsolete at this point. Yeah.
Another question in the audience? Up front.
Excuse me.
Sorry, I was like multitasking. You said something about experience builder and components. What was that?
Yes. So I didn't actually see the questions asked online, but I think it's probably good to say because it comes up a lot.
Yes. So we had multiple questions online about how do I use the Maps SDK with the Experience Builder Developer Edition? How do I use Calcite components instead of if I in place of GMU? So for that, the Experience Builder has documentation under the sample code section about how to do that. They also have samples that you can follow. And there's a session. Yeah, Gavin's going to be presenting tomorrow about advanced customization in Experience Builder using map components. So that'll cover pretty much everything you need to get started.
And just to be clear, that is the recommended approach. It's not just like an option. Like everybody should be migrating any widget code, whether it's in a custom app or an Experience Builder custom widget, migrating to use components, the JavaScript SDK components.
So last year, I felt like there was a divide between components and Experience Builder widgets. There was like two different paths.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just messaging, but is it fair to say that all the underlying code now is pretty unified?
Your first thing you said is, okay, so I think we were still in the process of Experience Builder kind of making progress towards components. So we were kind of finalizing that story, but it's always been the story that all of our Esri is moving to components. It's just kind of each product team has their roadmap to get there. So today you can build custom widgets for Experience Builder using components. You can and should. Experience Builder GMU framework is still in the process of doing that migration, but that doesn't hold you back as a developer. You can start now. That's going to take them all year to migrate all of their framework over to components. Actually, all of Esri are in the same kind of place as a lot of our customers where we're working to migrate our applications to use components, and Experience Builder is one of the ones that's still working on that.
But Experience Builder will have they will always have their widget framework because they need to wire the UI with the rest of the application. Yeah. So
And they also moved to React 19 as well, so then it's even easier for you to bring the components in this Experience Builder widget glue.
So just to soothe any concerns, because sometimes as developers we go down this one path and Esri says, sorry, you got to go this way.
Yes.
The investment we're making in Experience Builder custom widgets is not lost at all, right? Because it's all going to be the same.
That's a very good question. Yeah. It is not lost. There is some work you have to do, technical debt as you move to the new patterns, and there will be benefits to moving to these new patterns, but there is some work you have to do to catch up with that. Yeah, but you will not lose all of your work. It's not a rewrite. I thought I saw another. Oh, there's another question. I think we could stay a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, in the white. Or sorry.
Sorry. I have one question. We use the ArcGIS 4.24 version, which uses the Kendo Dojo to load the modules. And is there any way to migrate them to the 5.0 easily?
Can you repeat?
Sorry about that. We use the ArcGIS 4.24 version, which uses the Dojo loader to load all the modules, and it is pretty old and it is deprecated. Is there any easiest way to migrate to the 5.0?
There is no easy way to migrate to ES modules. It's, like the steps that I went through, going over like using $ArcGIS import. To import the SDK module and then converting your AMD modules to ES module, we do it. The The difficulty will be if you rely on a lot of external dependencies that you don't own. But then if it's just your application code, it should be pretty mechanical to use export instead of like define and return. Yeah.
Okay. One more question. I see the ArcGIS Search widget, right? In the code base, I see 2 results. I don't understand what is the search complete has 2 results.
The search component?
Yeah.
There was 2 sets of results because the top one was from searching my layer. I searched the trails layer, and the second set of results was from searching the world geocoder.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, we're going to have to cut it. But if you want to come up front, we can answer your question.